Maria Santos wiped down the same table for the third time that morning, her weathered hands moving in practiced circles across the worn formica surface. The small diner buzzed with the usual crowd of truckers, construction workers, and local office employees grabbing their morning coffee before heading to work. At 52, Maria had been serving breakfast at Eddie's Diner for nearly 15 years, and she had become as much a fixture as the cracked vinyl booths and the perpetually broken jukebox in the corner. Most customers barely acknowledged her existence beyond placing their orders. She was just another face in their routine, someone who filled their coffee cups and brought their eggs over easy without complaint. Maria had grown accustomed to being invisible, moving through her shifts like a ghost in a faded uniform that had seen better days. Her English, though functional, carried a heavy accent that some customers found amusing, often speaking louder and slower as if she were hard of hearing, rather than simply bilingual. What none of these customers knew was that Maria Santos had once been Captain Maria Elena Santos Rivera of the Salvadoran Armed Forces Medical Corps. 25 years ago, she had commanded a field hospital during one of the most brutal conflicts in Central American history. She had performed emergency surgeries under artillery fire, organized medical evacuations through hostile territory, and saved countless lives while risking her own daily. Her hands, now rough from years of dish soap and cleaning chemicals, had once moved with surgical precision through life and death operations. The war had ended, but peace brought its own challenges. Political upheaval and economic instability made it impossible for many former military officers to find work in their homeland, especially women who had broken traditional barriers by serving in combat zones. Maria made the difficult decision to leave everything behind and seek a new life in America, hoping to eventually practice medicine again. She arrived with nothing but her medical training, a handful of credentials that seemed meaningless without proper certification, and an unshakable determination to survive. The process of getting her medical credentials recognized in the United States proved to be a bureaucratic nightmare that stretched on for years. Language barriers, expensive certification exams, and the need to work multiple jobs just to pay rent made it nearly impossible to navigate the complex requirements. Slowly, her savings dwindled and her dreams of returning to medicine began to fade. The woman who had once made split-second decisions that determined whether soldiers lived or died now found herself asking whether customers wanted hash browns or home fries. At Eddie's Diner, Maria created a new identity for herself as the reliable, hard-working waitress who never called in sick and always stayed late when needed. She learned the preferences of regular customers, remembered how they liked their coffee, and maintained a cheerful demeanor even on the most difficult days. The owner, Eddie, appreciated her work ethic, but he saw her as nothing more than dependable help. To him, she was just another immigrant grateful for any job, not someone with a distinguished military background and advanced medical training. The other staff members were friendly enough, but they too saw Maria through the lens of their limited interactions. Janet, the head waitress, occasionally invited her to after-work gatherings, but Maria usually declined, preferring to spend her free time studying English or researching ways to get back into medicine. Her co-workers interpreted this as shyness or antisocial behavior, never suspecting that she was using every spare moment to try to rebuild the career she had lost. Regular customers developed their own assumptions about Maria based on brief interactions and surface observations. Some were kind and patient, treating her with basic courtesy. Others were dismissive or condescending, speaking to her as if she were less intelligent because of her accent or immigrant status. A few made inappropriate comments about her appearance or background, apparently believing that her position as a waitress made such behavior acceptable. Through it all, Maria maintained her professionalism, serving everyone with equal care regardless of how they treated her. During quiet moments between breakfast and lunch rushes, Maria would sometimes stand by the window and watch the world go by outside. She observed business people hurrying past in expensive suits, students from the nearby community college grabbing quick meals between classes, and families enjoying weekend brunches together. Each person seemed to belong to a world that felt increasingly distant from her own daily reality. She wondered if any of them had ever experienced the kind of dramatic life changes that had brought her to this place. The weight of her hidden past sometimes felt overwhelming. She had memories of commanding respect from subordinates and colleagues, of being consulted on critical decisions, of knowing that her expertise could mean the difference between life and death. Now, her most important decisions involved whether to suggest the daily special or refill someone's coffee cup. The contrast between her former life and current circumstances created a strange form of grief for the person she used to be. Despite these challenges, Maria refused to let bitterness consume her. She approached each day with quiet dignity, treating every customer and coworker with the same respect she had once shown to everyone from enlisted soldiers to commanding officers. She understood that her current situation was temporary, even if she didn't know when or how it might change. Her military training had taught her patience, resilience, and the ability to maintain hope even in the darkest circumstances. As another busy morning wound down and the lunch crowd began to arrive, Maria straightened her uniform and checked her reflection in the chrome surface of the coffee machine. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the confident military officer she had once been, but the same strength and determination lived behind her eyes. She had survived war, displacement, and years of struggle. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same courage that had carried her through everything else. Little did Maria know that her life was about to change dramatically, and that all those years of quiet service and hidden dignity were about to be recognized in a way she never could have imagined. The morning of March 15th started like any other at Eddie's Diner. Maria arrived at 5:30 to help prepare for the breakfast rush, tying her apron and filling the first pot of coffee as the sun painted pale streaks across the horizon. The familiar routine provided comfort in its predictability, checking table settings, reviewing the daily specials, and greeting the early birds who arrived before 6 o'clock for their usual orders. By 8 o'clock, the diner hummed with typical morning energy. Construction workers grabbed quick breakfast sandwiches before heading to job sites. Office workers picked up coffee to fuel their commute, and retirees settled into their favorite booths for leisurely meals and conversation. Maria moved efficiently between tables, taking orders and refilling coffee cups with the practiced ease of someone who had mastered the rhythm of restaurant service. At table 6, a group of young business associates discussed their upcoming presentation while picking at their Eggs Benedict. Maria noticed how one of them spoke dismissively about the help at their previous meeting location, apparently unaware that she could understand every word of their conversation. At the counter, an elderly man in a veteran's cap sat quietly reading his newspaper and nursing his black coffee, occasionally glancing up to observe the bustling activity around him. Around 9:15, Maria was clearing dishes from table 3 when she noticed a slight commotion near the entrance. The usual morning chatter seemed to quiet slightly as several people turned their attention toward the front door. She looked up to see a distinguished-looking man in his early 60s entering the diner, accompanied by 2 younger men in crisp business suits. There was something about the way they carried themselves that suggested importance, though Maria couldn't immediately identify what made them stand out from other well-dressed customers. The man in the lead had silver hair and wore an expensive-looking navy blazer over dress slacks. His posture was unmistakably military. Straight spine, measured steps, and an alertness in his eyes that spoke of years of command responsibility. The 2 men with him flanked him at a respectful distance, clearly subordinates despite their own professional appearance. They weren't wearing uniforms, but Maria's trained eye recognized the subtle signs of military bearing in all 3 men. Eddie hurried over from behind the register, his usual casual demeanor replaced by an obvious desire to make a good impression on what appeared to be important customers. He guided them to the best available booth and personally handed them menus, making small talk about the diner's history and recommending his favorite breakfast items. The distinguished gentleman smiled politely, but seemed more interested in observing the restaurant's operations than discussing menu options. As Maria continued her rounds, she found herself occasionally glancing toward the booth where the 3 men sat. Something about the older man seemed familiar, though she couldn't place where she might have encountered him before. His bearing and the way he carried himself reminded her of high-ranking officers she had known during her military service. But that seemed impossible given her current circumstances and the passage of time. The veteran at the counter had also noticed the new arrivals and was studying them with obvious interest. During her 15 years at the diner, Maria had served many former military personnel and had learned to recognize the subtle ways they acknowledged each other's service, even in civilian settings. She watched as the elderly man's gaze moved between the three newcomers, his expression suggesting recognition or at least professional curiosity. When the time came to take their order, Maria approached the table with her usual professional courtesy. The older gentleman looked up at her with kind eyes and a warm smile, thanking her for the coffee she poured and asking thoughtful questions about the daily specials. His voice carried authority but was tempered with genuine politeness, the kind of natural leadership that came from years of command, responsibility exercised with wisdom and consideration. As she wrote down their breakfast orders, Maria noticed the way the two younger men deferred to their companion without being obvious about it. They waited for him to order first, followed his lead in conversation, and paid careful attention to his reactions to their surroundings. This wasn't the typical dynamic of business colleagues or friends sharing a meal. It was the subtle hierarchy of military culture translated into civilian interaction. The distinguished gentleman ordered simply scrambled eggs, wheat toast, and fresh fruit, while asking Maria about her recommendations and commenting positively on the diner's atmosphere. His genuine interest in her suggestions and his courteous manner stood in sharp contrast to many customers who treated her as little more than a means to getting their food delivered. She found herself responding more warmly than usual, though she maintained her professional demeanor. During their meal, Maria observed the three men from a distance as she served other customers. Their conversation appeared serious but comfortable, with the older man clearly in charge while encouraging input from his companions. Occasionally, she caught fragments of their discussion that suggested military terminology or strategic thinking, though they were careful to keep their voices low in the public setting. The elderly veteran at the counter had finished his breakfast but remained seated, occasionally glancing toward the booth while pretending to read his newspaper. Maria wondered if he was trying to place the newcomers or simply enjoying the company of fellow service members, even at a distance. The atmosphere in the diner seemed slightly different with their presence, as if their military bearing had subtly influenced the energy of the entire space. As she refilled their coffee cups during the meal, the older gentleman thanked her again and made casual conversation about the diner and the local area. His questions were intelligent and showed genuine interest in learning about the community, not just making polite small talk. Maria found herself wishing she could reveal more about her own background and experiences, but her position as a waitress made such personal revelations seem inappropriate. When they finished eating and prepared to leave, the distinguished gentleman left a generous tip and personally thanked Maria for her excellent service. His parting words carried a warmth and respect that left her feeling valued in a way she hadn't experienced in years. As she watched them exit the diner and drive away in a black sedan, she couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter had been somehow significant, though she had no way of knowing just how dramatically it would soon change her life. 3 days after the distinguished visitors had left Eddie's diner, Maria was working her usual afternoon shift when she noticed an unusual flurry of activity outside. Several black vehicles had pulled up across the street, and men in dark suits were positioned at various points around the building. The sight made her stomach tighten with an inexplicable sense of anticipation mixed with anxiety. Her military training had taught her to notice such details, and everything about the scene suggested official business of the highest importance. Inside the diner, other customers had also begun to notice the unusual presence outside. Conversations grew quieter as people craned their necks to peer through the windows, trying to understand what was happening. Eddie emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron and looking concerned about the potential impact on his business. The lunch crowd seemed torn between curiosity about the developing situation and desire to finish their meals and leave before becoming involved in whatever was unfolding. Around 2 o'clock, the same distinguished gentleman from earlier in the week entered the diner, but this time his presence carried unmistakable authority. He was now wearing a formal military dress uniform adorned with ribbons, insignia, and decorations that immediately identified him as a high-ranking officer. The sight of his 4-star general's insignia sent a wave of recognition and shock through Maria's entire being. She had served under the command structure long enough to understand exactly what those stars represented. Behind him entered an entourage that included other military officers, official aides, and what appeared to be a small media contingent with cameras and recording equipment. The casual atmosphere of the neighborhood diner was instantly transformed into something resembling an official military ceremony. Eddie stood frozen behind the counter, clearly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening in his modest establishment. The general's eyes swept the room purposefully before settling on Maria, who stood near table 4 with a coffee pot still in her hand. Time seemed to slow as he walked directly toward her, his polished dress shoes clicking against the worn linoleum floor. Every person in the diner watched in stunned silence as this powerful military leader approached the waitress, who had been invisible to most of them just moments before. When he stopped directly in front of Maria, the general's expression was solemn but warm. In a clear voice that carried throughout the suddenly silent restaurant, he spoke words that would forever change how everyone present viewed the woman they had known only as a hard-working server. "Captain Santos Rivera, it is an honor to finally meet you. Your service to our allied forces during the Salvadoran conflict has not been forgotten." The coffee pot slipped from Maria's trembling hands, shattering against the floor, as 25 years of carefully maintained composure crumbled in an instant. The general continued speaking, his voice growing more emotional as he recounted specific instances of her heroism during the war. He described how her field hospital had saved the lives of American military advisors, how her medical expertise had been crucial during a particularly devastating battle, and how her courage under fire had earned the respect of international forces serving in the region. As the general spoke, Maria's co-workers and regular customers began to see her through completely different eyes. The quiet woman who had served their breakfast for years was being revealed as a decorated war hero whose actions had saved countless lives. The elderly veteran at the counter, tears streaming down his face, later admitted that he had suspected something about her military bearing, but never imagined the extent of her service and sacrifice. The general then reached into his jacket and withdrew an official document along with a military decoration that gleamed under the diner's fluorescent lights. He explained that newly discovered records and testimony from surviving American personnel had led to her being awarded a commendation from the United States military for her extraordinary service to Allied forces. The medal recognition had taken years to process through official channels, but the military had finally tracked her down to present it properly. With precise military bearing, the 4-star general straightened to attention and rendered a perfect salute to Maria, holding the position until she instinctively returned the gesture with the crisp precision of her former rank. The entire diner watched in absolute silence as these two warriors acknowledged each other's service across the barriers of time, nationality, and circumstance. The moment was captured by photographers and would later become an iconic image representing recognition of hidden heroism. Maria's voice was barely a whisper as she thanked the general for the honor, struggling to find words in either English or Spanish adequate to express her emotions. The weight of years spent feeling invisible and forgotten lifted from her shoulders as she realized that her service had indeed mattered, that the lives she had saved had not been forgotten, and that her sacrifice had finally been acknowledged by those who understood its true value. The general then did something unexpected. Instead of conducting a formal ceremony and leaving, he asked if he and his staff could sit down for a proper conversation. Eddie quickly cleared the best booth in the restaurant, and for the next hour, Maria found herself sharing stories of her wartime experiences with fellow military professionals who understood the weight of command decisions and the reality of service in combat zones. During their conversation, the general revealed that one of the American soldiers whose life Maria had saved had spent decades trying to find her to express his gratitude. That soldier, now a retired colonel, had finally located her through a combination of military records research and old-fashioned detective work. The presentation of the medal was not just an official recognition, but a personal mission to ensure that her heroism received the acknowledgement it deserved. As news of the ceremony began to spread through social media and local news outlets, people started gathering outside the diner. Maria's story of hidden service and unexpected recognition resonated with many who understood that heroes often walk among us unrecognized, performing ordinary jobs while carrying extraordinary histories. The waitress who had been invisible for 15 years had suddenly become a symbol of dignity, service, and the hidden depths that exist in every human being. By the end of the afternoon, Maria's life had been transformed not just by the official recognition, but by the renewed sense of purpose and identity that came with it. The general made sure she understood that doors were now open to her that had been closed for decades, and that her experience and expertise were valued in ways she had almost stopped believing possible. In the days following the ceremony at Eddie's Diner, Maria's life became a whirlwind of attention and opportunities that she never could have imagined. The story of the decorated war hero working as a waitress captured national media attention, with news outlets from across the country wanting to interview her about her extraordinary journey from battlefield surgeon to neighborhood restaurant server. Phone calls poured into the diner from journalists, documentary filmmakers, and organizations wanting to honor her service and help her reclaim her medical career. Eddie found himself completely overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of his modest establishment into a destination for people wanting to meet Maria and hear her story firsthand. The usual routine of serving breakfast and lunch to local customers was disrupted by a constant stream of visitors, reporters, and curious onlookers who wanted to see where the famous ceremony had taken place. He had to hire additional security and implement crowd control measures to manage the influx of attention while still serving his regular clientele. Maria struggled to process the dramatic shift in how people now treated her. Customers who had barely acknowledged her existence for 15 years suddenly wanted to shake her hand, take photographs, and thank her for her service. Regular patrons approached her with apologies for not recognizing her true worth and background, expressing embarrassment about their previous dismissive attitudes. The transformation was both gratifying and overwhelming, as years of invisibility gave way to intense scrutiny and admiration. The elderly veteran who had been observing the general during his first visit returned to the diner specifically to speak with Maria. He introduced himself as Sergeant First Class Robert Chen, retired, and revealed that he had served in Central America during the same period as her deployment. Through tears, he told her about friends whose lives had been saved by field medics like her, and how he had always wondered about the brave medical personnel who had served alongside American forces. Their conversation became an emotional bridge between two veterans who had shared the same dangerous theater of operations from different perspectives. Within a week of the ceremony, Maria began receiving job offers from major hospitals, medical institutions, and veteran service organizations across the country. The recognition she had received from the four-star general had opened doors that her foreign credentials alone never could have unlocked. Several prestigious medical centers offered to help her navigate the credential recognition process, providing resources and support that had been unavailable to her for decades. The American Medical Association reached out with information about programs specifically designed to help foreign-trained physicians transition back into practice. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison from Johns Hopkins Medical Center called personally to offer Maria a position as a consultant in their trauma surgery department. While she worked toward full medical license, restoration, Dr. Morrison explained that Maria's combination of battlefield medical experience and years of patient service made her uniquely qualified to help train the next generation of emergency medicine physicians. The opportunity represented everything Maria had dreamed of during her years of serving coffee and clearing tables. The Department of Veterans Affairs also contacted Maria about joining their medical staff. Recognizing that her unique background would be invaluable in treating veterans who had experienced combat trauma, they offered to fast-track her credential review process and provide specialized training to help her adapt her military medical experience to civilian veteran care. The irony was not lost on Maria that the same government bureaucracy that had seemed impenetrable for decades was now actively recruiting her. Services.media interviews revealed the broader implications of Maria's story for thousands of other immigrant professionals who had been unable to practice their trained professions in the United States. Immigration advocacy groups reached out to use her story as an example of the talent and expertise that often goes unrecognized in immigrant communities. Several universities invited her to speak about her experiences, hoping to inspire policy changes that would better utilize the skills of foreign-trained professionals. The financial implications of these new opportunities were staggering compared to her waitress salary. Medical positions were offering salaries that would transform her economic situation overnight, finally providing the security and stability she had been working toward for decades. More importantly, the offers represented a chance to return to the work she loved and had trained for, using her skills to save lives rather than serve meals. However, the sudden abundance of choices also created unexpected stress and decision-making challenges. After years of having limited options, Maria now faced the overwhelming task of choosing between multiple prestigious opportunities. Each offer came with different advantages, locations, and requirements for credential restoration. The woman who had grown accustomed to having her daily routine dictated by diner schedules now needed to make complex career decisions that would determine the direction of the rest of her professional life. Support came from unexpected sources as her story continued to spread. A group of retired military officers established a scholarship fund in her honor to help other veteran immigrants pursue professional development and credential recognition. The fund received donations from across the military community, with contributors expressing gratitude for her service and determination to ensure that other heroes didn't remain hidden for decades. Local community members also rallied around Maria with practical support and encouragement. Neighbors she had never met brought flowers to the diner, regular customers organized a celebration dinner in her honor, and the mayor presented her with a key to the city during a formal ceremony. The recognition felt surreal to someone who had grown accustomed to being overlooked, but it also provided validation for the years of patience and perseverance that had brought her to this moment. Throughout this period of dramatic change, Maria remained remarkably grounded and thoughtful about her next steps. Her military training and years of quiet service had taught her to be methodical in decision-making, even under pressure. She spent hours researching each opportunity, consulting with advisors, and carefully considering how to best use this unexpected second chance at her medical career. The most meaningful aspect of her newfound recognition was the opportunity to reconnect with her professional identity as a physician and surgeon. For the first time in decades, people were asking for her medical opinions, consulting her about healthcare policy, and treating her as the expert she had always been. The intellectual stimulation of these conversations reminded her of how much she had missed using her medical training and knowledge to help solve complex problems and save lives. 2 years after the life-changing ceremony at Eddie's Diner, Dr. Maria Santos Rivera stood in the Johns Hopkins Trauma Bay, leading a team of medical residents through a complex emergency surgery. The patient, a young construction worker who had suffered severe injuries in a workplace accident, required the kind of rapid decision-making and precise surgical skills that Maria had honed during her military service decades earlier. As she guided her team through the procedure, her confidence and expertise were evident to everyone in the operating room. The transformation in Maria's professional life had exceeded even her most optimistic expectations. She had successfully completed all credential requirements and was now a fully licensed physician specializing in trauma surgery. Her unique combination of battlefield medical experience and recent patient service perspective made her an exceptional teacher and mentor to younger doctors. Medical students often requested rotations under her supervision, eager to learn from someone whose experience bridged military medicine, immigrant struggles, and civilian healthcare excellence. Dr. Kim, her department chief, frequently relied on Maria's expertise for the most challenging cases, recognizing that her combat medicine background provided insights that traditional civilian training couldn't match. Maria's ability to remain calm under extreme pressure and make split-second decisions in chaotic situations had saved numerous lives since her return to medicine. Her colleagues respected not just her technical skills but also her compassion for patients, which had been deepened by her own years of struggle and perseverance. The trauma center had become a training ground for innovative approaches to emergency medicine, with Maria developing new protocols that incorporated lessons learned from battlefield medicine. Her research papers on trauma care were published in prestigious medical journals, and she was invited to speak at conferences around the world. The woman who had once felt invisible was now recognized as a leading expert in her field, consulted by medical professionals across multiple countries. Beyond her clinical work, Maria had established the Santos Rivera Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping foreign-trained healthcare professionals navigate the complex process of credential recognition in the United States. The foundation provided financial assistance for testing and certification fees, legal support for bureaucratic challenges, and mentorship programs connecting established professionals with those seeking credential restoration. Her own experience had shown her exactly where the system failed immigrant professionals, and she was determined to create pathways for others to avoid the decades of struggle she had endured. The Foundation's success stories multiplied monthly, with doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and other healthcare workers reclaiming their professional identities thanks to the support and guidance Maria's organization provided. Each success felt personal to Maria, representing another talented professional who would contribute to American healthcare rather than remaining underutilized in survival jobs. The ripple effects of her recognition continued expanding, creating opportunities for hundreds of other skilled immigrants who had been overlooked by the system. Eddie's Diner had become an unexpected pilgrimage site for people inspired by Maria's story. The booth where the general had presented her medal was marked with a small plaque, and visitors from around the world stopped by to meet Eddie and hear first-hand accounts of the ceremony that had changed everything. Eddie had transformed the recognition into positive publicity for his restaurant, while maintaining the unpretentious atmosphere that had made it special. He kept a photo of Maria in her Johns Hopkins coat prominently displayed, along with newspaper clippings documenting her remarkable journey. The relationships Maria had built during her diner years remained important to her, even as her circumstances had dramatically changed. She regularly returned to visit Eddie and her former co-workers, maintaining friendships that had sustained her through difficult times. Janet, the former head waitress, had become one of her closest confidants, someone who understood both sides of Maria's journey and provided emotional support during the adjustment to her new life. Sergeant Chen and his group of veteran friends had become surrogate family members for Maria, filling some of the social connections she had missed during her years of struggle. Their shared understanding of military service created bonds that transcended differences in background and experience. Together, they worked on veteran advocacy projects and supported other former service members facing challenges in civilian life. The media attention around Maria's story had evolved into ongoing coverage of immigrant success stories and healthcare workforce issues. She used her platform to advocate for policy changes that would streamline credential recognition processes and better utilize the skills of foreign-trained professionals. Her testimony before congressional committees helped inform legislation designed to address these systemic problems, turning her personal experience into broader social change. Recognition continued to come from unexpected sources. The Salvadoran government honored her with their highest civilian decoration, celebrating her service to their country and her success in representing their nation abroad. Medical schools began including her story in their curricula as an example of resilience, dedication, and the importance of recognizing talent regardless of its packaging. Her journey from invisible waitress to celebrated surgeon became a case study in human potential and the power of persistence. Personal fulfillment came not just from professional success, but from the knowledge that her struggle had served a greater purpose. Every foreign-trained professional helped by her foundation, every medical student inspired by her teaching, and every patient whose life was saved through her expertise represented the ripple effects of recognition and second chances. Her years of invisibility had prepared her to see and value others who might be overlooked, making her a more compassionate physician and advocate. The annual Maria Santos Rivera recognition ceremony had become a tradition at Johns Hopkins, honoring immigrant healthcare workers who had overcome significant barriers to serve their communities. Each year's celebration brought together recipients of the Foundation's support, creating a network of professionals who understood the journey from struggle to success. These gatherings reminded Maria that her story was just one example of the hidden potential that exists throughout immigrant communities, waiting for the right opportunity to flourish. On quiet evenings, Maria often reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had transformed her life. The chance decision by a four-star general to have breakfast at Eddie's Diner, the recognition of her military bearing despite years in civilian clothes, and the courage required to publicly acknowledge her service had created a cascade of opportunities she never could have imagined. She understood that luck had played a role, but she also recognized that her years of maintaining dignity and professionalism despite difficult circumstances, had prepared her to seize those opportunities when they appeared. The young construction worker whose life she had saved in the trauma bay had recovered completely and returned to work, unaware that his surgeon had once been considered just a waitress by most of the world. His successful outcome represented everything Maria had hoped to achieve through her return to medicine: the ability to use her skills and experience to make a real difference in people's lives. Every successful surgery, every life saved, and every resident trained added meaning to the long journey that had brought her back to her true calling. As Dr. Maria Santos Rivera continued her rounds at Johns Hopkins, checking on patients and consulting with colleagues, she embodied the truth that heroism often wears ordinary clothes and speaks with accented English. Her story had become a powerful reminder that extraordinary people walk among us every day, serving coffee, driving buses, cleaning offices, and performing countless other jobs while carrying within themselves the capacity for greatness. The four-star general's salute had not created her worth. It had simply revealed what had always been there, waiting for the right moment to be recognized and celebrated. The legacy of that moment in Eddie's diner continued to expand, touching lives far beyond Maria's own remarkable transformation. In operating rooms, classrooms, policy meetings, and immigration offices across the country, her story influenced how people viewed immigrant professionals and the hidden potential that exists in every community. The waitress who had been invisible for 15 years had become a beacon of hope for anyone whose true worth had yet to be recognized, proving that it is never too late for talent, dedication, and courage to receive the acknowledgement they deserve. After weeks of careful consideration and consultation with career advisors, Maria made her decision. She accepted the position at Johns Hopkins Medical Center, drawn by their comprehensive support program for credential restoration and their commitment to trauma surgery training. The position would allow her to work as a consulting physician while completing the requirements to practice independently, providing the perfect bridge between her past medical experience and her future career goals. The decision felt like coming home after a 25-year detour through circumstances beyond her control. Her last day at Eddie's diner became an emotional celebration that drew hundreds of people from the local community and beyond. The small restaurant was packed with regular customers, fellow veterans, medical professionals, and strangers who had been inspired by her story. Eddie closed the diner to regular business for the afternoon, transforming it into a farewell party that honored both Maria's years of dedicated service and her exciting new beginning. Local news stations covered the event, turning it into a community celebration of recognition and second chances. The farewell gathering brought together people from every aspect of Maria's American journey. Janet, the head waitress, presented her with a photo album documenting her 15 years at the diner, filled with pictures of staff parties, regular customers, and quiet moments that captured the dignity she had maintained throughout her service. The elderly veteran, Sergeant Chen, brought a group of his military buddies who wanted to personally thank her and wish her well. Even some of the customers who had previously treated her dismissively attended, many offering heartfelt apologies and expressions of admiration for her grace under difficult circumstances. Dr. Morrison from Johns Hopkins attended the farewell party via video call, formally welcoming Maria to their medical team and outlining the orientation program that would help her transition back into hospital medicine. She explained how Maria's unique combination of battlefield trauma experience and patient service skills would be invaluable in training medical residents and developing new approaches to emergency care. The professional validation in front of her diner colleagues felt like the completion of a long journey toward reclaiming her true identity. The four-star general who had initiated Maria's recognition sent a personal message that was read aloud during the gathering. He emphasized that her story demonstrated the hidden strength and expertise that exists throughout American communities, often in the most unexpected places. His words reminded everyone present that true heroism rarely announces itself but can be found in the quiet dedication of people who continue serving others regardless of recognition or reward. Maria's emotional farewell speech moved many attendees to tears as she expressed gratitude for the years of steady employment that had allowed her to survive and maintain hope during her most difficult period. She thanked Eddie for giving her a chance when she desperately needed work, her fellow staff members for their friendship and support, and the regular customers who had shown kindness during their interactions. Most importantly, she emphasized that her experience had taught her never to underestimate the depth and complexity of any person's life story. The transition to her new position at Johns Hopkins required Maria to relocate to Baltimore and adapt to an entirely different professional environment after decades away from hospital medicine. The medical center provided comprehensive orientation that included updates on new technologies, treatment protocols, and administrative systems that had evolved significantly since her active practice days. Her colleagues were eager to learn from her battlefield experience while helping her navigate the complexities of modern American healthcare. Dr. Sarah Kim, the trauma surgery department chief, became Maria's primary mentor during the transition period. She had specifically requested Maria's assignment to her department after reading about her military medical experience and recognizing the value of her battlefield trauma expertise. Together, they developed training programs that incorporated Maria's hands-on experience with emergency medicine under extreme conditions, creating new approaches to trauma care that combined military field medicine with civilian hospital resources. Within her first month at Johns Hopkins, Maria was invited to speak at a national medical conference about battlefield medicine applications in civilian trauma centers. Her presentation drew standing ovations from emergency medicine physicians who recognized the relevance of her combat experience to their daily work treating gun violence, accident victims, and other traumatic injuries. The professional validation felt overwhelming after years of having her medical expertise ignored and underutilized. The credential restoration process moved more smoothly than Maria had dared to hope, thanks to institutional support and her newly elevated profile in the medical community. Legal advocates helped navigate bureaucratic requirements that had seemed impossible to overcome alone, while medical board reviewers expedited her application based on documented evidence of her exceptional service record. The same credentials that had been dismissed for decades were suddenly viewed as valuable assets that enhanced American healthcare capabilities. Media attention continued to follow Maria's transition, with medical journals publishing articles about her journey and its implications for healthcare workforce development. Immigration policy experts cited her case as evidence of the need to better recognize and utilize the skills of foreign-trained professionals already living in the United States. Her story became a catalyst for legislative discussions about reforming credential recognition, processes for immigrant healthcare workers. Personal relationships also evolved as Maria adjusted to her dramatically changed circumstances. Friends and acquaintances from her diner days expressed amazement at her transformation, while new colleagues treated her with the professional respect she had missed for so long. The emotional adjustment to being valued and recognized after years of invisibility required its own form of healing and adaptation. The financial security that came with her medical position allowed Maria to pursue goals that had been impossible on a waitress salary. She enrolled in continuing education courses to update her medical knowledge, purchased medical textbooks and journals she couldn't afford before, and began planning to eventually specialize in emergency medicine or trauma surgery. For the first time in decades, she could think beyond mere survival toward professional growth and contribution. Most significantly, Maria began working with immigrant advocacy organizations to help other foreign-trained professionals navigate the complex process of credential recognition and career restoration. Her experience became a roadmap for others facing similar challenges, and her success provided hope to healthcare workers, engineers, teachers, and other professionals whose expertise had been overlooked due to bureaucratic barriers and cultural assumptions about immigrant capabilities.